Chapter 5, Where? Where do we first train or hire Scrum Masters to increase business performance? Should we first find successes on a simple and likely to succeed project? Or are agile methods a better fit for a high revenue, high risk, and complicated project? What I'm trying to say here by where is which project. Maybe the better title would be which, but where in the company should we amplify agility and first deploy agility for maximum effect? I mean, you could do the whole company at once if you had the means and were enthusiastic. That works. But if you need to incrementally deploy agile methods or increase agile methods, where would you choose to first amplify or deploy agile methods? David Snowden has proposed a 5-space map to detect project type. What type is a project? Snowden proposes this map will imply how to lead and make effective decisions. David calls this Cynefin or Cynefin. Or more completely, the Cynefin framework, based on a Welsh word which is pronounced Cynefin. That roughly translates as place or habitat. Harvard Business Review called the Cynefin framework a leadership framework for decision-making, even as early as November 2007. We recommend learning and practicing the approach directly from Snowden's Cognitive Edge consultancy. Snowden is often humble, approachable, and easy to listen to. Here is how we would apply Cynefin to answer the question of where to apply our Scrum Masters to increase business performance. First, we will adopt a position of humility. We don't know everything there is to know about our opportunity to achieve. We will assume we are in a state of at least partial disorder. From that, we now have room to learn about our opportunity. We will iterate to make our best guess, whether achieving our opportunity is bottlenecked by completing work that is ordered, complicated, complex, or chaotic. And that's the critical factor here, the way Snowden thinks about it, is if we can determine if the bottlenecking factor, well, Snowden wants to know, is the work ordered, complicated, complex, or chaotic? Then what I will add to that is, what is bottlenecking our speed of innovation? Is the bottleneck ordered, complicated, complex, or chaotic? If we can improve a complicated problem or a complex problem or a chaotic problem or an ordered problem, will that increase the throughput of innovation until the next bottleneck is there? Then we would detect its type. For those of you already confident with Scrum, perhaps on your second reading of this book, we will recommend putting cards in your backlog to learn more about your current opportunity as fast as possible. In the case, the opportunity might be expiring or have a high cost of delay. And that's what I do as an Agile coach, as a chief Agile officer as well, is I do a value stream map analysis of whatever part of the company or flow I get to work with, sometimes the whole company, and attempt to find the bottleneck, then attempt to find how to alleviate it or reduce it as quickly as possible. And a tool to do that is it ordered, complicated, complex, or chaotic? Now that we've learned a little bit more about our opportunity and what is bottlenecking or achieving that opportunity, we will create a backlog to better achieve it. We will have 4 cases. Initially, please allow us to say that a primary bottleneck to achieving our opportunity is some ordered work. This will be our case 1 of 4. So we'll have a case for each of the 4 major quadrants of Cynefin. There is a 5th quadrant. The Cynefin framework asks us to learn just a little bit more. Is the work likely obvious or complicated? If the work is obvious, we will put our cards in the backlog to check our understanding of best practice. Following this, we will put cards in our backlog to exploit as fast as possible. Now, I intentionally use the word exploit here. I'm an environmentalist. I believe in a post-growth economy. However, the word exploit is exactly what I'm talking about here in business. It's to, as rapidly as possible, devour the inputs to produce the outputs. And I'll talk more about why I think exploit is the correct word and the ethics that implies. Finally, we will add cards in our backlog written to experiment to improve the state of the art of the best practice and exploit even more efficiently and quickly. These innovation cards are very often flow improvements and bottleneck eliminators. For deeper information on this, we recommend learning the flow system from its creators, Brian Ponte-Riviera, a former fighter pilot, trained and skilled in rapid decision-making in emerging and high-risk environments. Nigel Thurlow, a former Toyota consultant and later employee, trained and skilled in flow optimizations in the Toyota production system. And John Turner, PhD, who has a deep research, modeling, and abstraction skills. If you do not have time to dig into their research now, we can summarize this into the following next step for you to take. Create a value stream map from the envisioned destination to the opportunity achieved backwards to your current state. So this is also related to Otto Scharmer's leading from an emergent future, which I talked about in the introduction. If you imagine all the probable futures, which is the better outcome as far as you can assess now, then create a value stream map from that not yet happened future back to where you are now. And that's your backlog in reverse order. And that's my addition to the flow systems work and to Otto Scharmer's work. Practically, for our Scrum Masters, that will mean a to-do list of cards, starting with enjoying the benefit of the opportunity achieved. And then the simplest, cheapest, leanest card that allows that to happen. And so on, backwards, until we arrive at our current state. This is how we generate backlog with our teams, when the work is bottlenecked by obvious work. Generating backlog is done regularly in Scrum during each cycle or sprint, during an activity called product backlog refinement. More on that in chapter 12, plan. Now we have our backlog to exploit the obvious bottleneck and improve the growing and harvesting with improving efficiency and speed every sprint cycle forever until we face a change in circumstances. Scrum does a great job here of keeping teams focused on performing the exploitation and improving the exploitation. This is a perfect example of elementary applications of the Toyota production system with Kaizen. Kaizen is the Japanese word for good change or process improvement. In Scrum, Kaizen events are conducted as often as practical. Note, we intentionally use the word exploit here. Please remember that in a systems view, a full exploitation may limit the duration the system can provide value, or the time the system may create desired, wow, this is a difficult sentence. Editors, please help me with this. This is a real difficult one. I'm gonna highlight. And there was one just above that was also pretty challenging. I'm not finding it now. I should have highlighted it right when I saw it. Editors, please help me improve for version 2. This chapter looks like it really has some run-on thoughts, which is how I think, but please help me make it so a high school student could comfortably have fun reading this book. That's the approachability I wish to achieve. And it's fine to change the ideas or use different examples, editors. Please think of it like a Disney song when translated into 2 different languages. We don't have to use the same words. It does not have to be literal, but the general meaning should be similar and it should be fun to listen to, like the 2 languages of a Disney song. That's how I would wish for this book to be edited. Please help me. So let me see, how can I say this? So in a systems view, when we look at the inputs and outputs and other players, other competitors, other beneficiaries, if we harvest everything, if we do what's called a full exploit, the system can, well, possibly the system can die, but we can lose the value of that thing we're harvesting. If there's a forest and we do complete clear cutting, the time until which we can get value from it again becomes incredibly much longer than if we did partial curated harvesting and intentional replantings. So when you're planning your exploits as a product owner, and this is why I intentionally use the word exploit, because if we don't think that our work could be burning out our team or burning out our employees or burning out our customers, burning out the market, or consuming a resource at an unsustainable rate, if we're not a good player in the system, it can limit the overall value, not only to us over the long duration, but also to the system, to everyone else. And that is socially, ethically a poor choice to limit the overall utility, overall value of the system. A good backlog, just like any good action in the planet, increases the overall value of the system while apportioning part of the value to the people who are doing the work, who are taking the initiative to understand how to make that happen. That's the goal of your backlog. And this is part of a product owner's job, to legitimately meditate on this, to think deeply on this, and attempt to every day better understand the system's view, which is difficult. I'll talk more about why it's difficult to understand a system's view in this chapter. If we exploit part of the system to the limit, other players in the system we may create desire in them to stop us if they're not benefiting from our exploit. We create enemies by overexploiting, and may produce second and further order effects that reduce the net value or even outweigh the net value. So if we do a full harvest in our backlog, a full exploit, like say we hire all the machine learning developers in our geography or in our time zone, we hire 100%, we do a full exploit. Well, that can create backlash. Other companies can create government intervention, and they might shut down machine learning as a practice in our time zone. For example, you can have net negative results to us and the entire system. So avoid full exploits. Find exploits where you get what you need while increasing the value of your part and the overall system, which is more challenging, but that's our job. In this way, even ordered and obvious opportunities actually rely on systems thinking. Systems thinking requires a backlog to continuously reevaluate total value, what we mean and are truly interested in as value. So we have to continually think, what is value to me? What is my understanding of it? What we mean and are truly interested as value, how our neighbors and others are benefiting or not, and whose perspective we are adopting to determine if we are generating or reducing value. That is how I think, but man, that does not read well. That should be edited into probably 4 smaller sentences. Truly, this becomes an ethics question almost immediately. And our recommendation to ourselves and our Scrum Masters is to order the backlog to be directionally correct. Directionally correct backlog means we assume we are wrong and work to be less wrong than we were last sprint, moving towards maximizing healthy and sustainable options. Healthy and sustainable options are here used to mean those which create new capabilities and reducing the cost and time to achieve and improve those capabilities. We also recommend rotating the personas used to validate the value statements. And for that and financial management of our project in detail, we refer you to our next level course and book, Product Owner. In the Product Owner course, and the book is then to be based on the course, we create personas and we rotate them to maximize value to the system. And there's a strategy on how the rotation is done. It's not straight round robin. Case 2 of 4. We have a backlog of ordered work for our team, but the primary bottleneck limiting or preventing us from maximizing the value of the opportunity is not obvious. It is complicated. Here, it is possible to create a reasonable fidelity model of the work. In complicated work, spreadsheets and formulas will return usably accurate results if we research the variables. To achieve this, the backlog percentage is much higher on research. This research is often querying experts and using modeling with self-iterating modeling tools like Keras or Chainer or TensorFlow, CUDA. A likely backlog item may be, as the team, we have tweeted 10 new polite requests to @JoeJustice to consult on our backlog so that we are more likely to move toward a higher fit model of our complicated work. As the work model is iterated, we generate good practices, as there are by definition many similarly valuable methods to widen a complicated bottleneck. Here, our Scrum Masters embrace many different types of backlog items to widen the bottleneck by completing the work. We also write backlog to collaborate outside our team. These backlog items create an egalitarian treatment of the team and contributors, an equal benefiting treatment of the team and contributors, often referred to as friends of the team, which keeps morale the highest while creating the least risk of optimum pace of progress. The research backlog is continuously replenished during each sprint as we develop more good practices and improve them and respond to changes. The percentage of exploit cards in the backlog grows to near the percentage of obvious work. Joe Justice recommends 80% exploit maximum, 20% research minimum of your product backlog, with more research as the complexity or volatility grows. For more information on the 80-20 rule and the Pareto curve, see our product owner course and book. Case 3 of 4, we have a complex bottleneck. This is the case the majority of the time. The Agile Business Institute recommends assuming the work to expand the bottleneck is complicated. It is complex. Reads a little better. Until evidence emerges to counter this belief. Complex problems do not benefit from prolonged analysis, and best or good practices work in some cases, but not others. The reality of a complex problem is that a system is dictating the behavior of the bottleneck. Anytime we have a system, it is by definition complex or chaotic, period. And anytime we involve humans, you have emotions, what we ate for breakfast, if someone is sick, if someone didn't sleep enough. Anytime we have humans, it's already complex at a minimum, and it can escalate to chaotic. So if there are any humans in your system, it is complex or chaotic, which is why we can assume our bottleneck is complex. If there's even one human involved in making a priority decision, like a product owner or a traditional manager, we have a complex system, or chaotic, and we'll talk about chaotic next. The reality of a complex problem is that a system is dictating the behavior of the bottleneck. Examples of systems are a group of humans and their moods, such as in the case of a management coalition, team, or board member vote. Systems thinking is the actual heart of Scrum. And by completing this book, you will have practiced and likely grown and fortified or myelinated synaptic pathways to accelerate and improve your systems thinking. To amplify this, we recommend the book, The Fifth Discipline by Peter Send. The observation here is that behaviors don't result from causes, such as A causes B in ordered work. Instead, the results are a sum of the forces acting on the bottleneck of our work. If we draw the problem visually, the drawing could reasonably be a map with antennae towers drawn on it here and there, each emanating a circular radiating pulse. The intersection of those pulses over our bottleneck is the current state of the bottleneck. So those antennae, those are a manager, the janitor, a customer, the Wi-Fi router that doesn't always work perfectly, the network cable going under the channel that is occasionally damaged, supply chain shortages, our supplier's mood, the boat captain and boat crew delivering a key part of our supplier. These are the antennas, and they emanate areas. And the bottleneck is the intersection of these emanating forces on this systems thinking map. So the boat is on time, but the captain is angry. So the next delay, the next shipment is more likely to be delayed. The management coalition votes to pinch down on the price of the suppliers. The boat captain returns, they're already angry. Now the supplier is even more angry. They actually intentionally short our next order giving more parts to a competitor with a higher bid. And the network pulse delays that transmission, et cetera. This is a complex system. That is a way to visualize systems thinking. It's not A causes B. It's moods radiate and their overlapping pulses affect wherever they're overlapping. And our bottleneck is somewhere on this map being affected by these overlapping pulses. The intersection of those pulses over our bottleneck is the current state of the bottleneck. Widening that bottleneck to achieve our opportunity is done by working on one of the antennae towers at a time to adjust what is radiated. So we work with the board member or join the board as a chief agile officer and start influencing equitable treatment, self-organizing teams, et cetera, so that pulse is changed. The board emanating pulse across the system is different. If we are successful and change what is radiated, some or all of the other antennae towers also in the range of that radiated signal will change also. We need to again observe our bottleneck and try before we try the next change. As complex as this sounds, the strategy performed here can be simple and elegant and fast. The Scrum Master will guide the team during product backlog refinement to first create backlog to make it as fast and low cost as possible to assess the current state of the bottleneck. This is the heart of test-driven development, and we recommend our Scrum Masters to go deep on the topic sooner rather than later, and suggest reading the book Extreme Programming Explained by Kent Beck with Cynthia Andrews. Although that book assumes a software programming project, the thinking model to effectively and rapidly create tests, ideally automated, to establish the feedback loop of the bottleneck to be solved by the working team. That is a valuable knowledge brought by a Scrum Master to any type of team, whether you're making software or not. If you have to call your suppliers to know their prices, their mood, what concerns them, your feedback loop is way too slow. Now that's a machine learning project like Tesla's Auto Bidder, where you're automatically polling and checking being empathetic with, from a machine learning context, all of your supplier base and all of your provider base. And so you have consistent real-time, less than a second pings from all. That's test-driven development in insurance or in energy markets. That's what you need. Those aren't software, but use a software project to make more visible the players in your complex system. Next, after we make more visible the state of the system, is to load the backlog with cards that let us change and roll back. Change is cheap and not scary if you can roll back in less than 5 seconds for most systems. If you can roll back before the damage is significant of a poor implementation, change is cheap and easy and not scary. This reduces the cost of a bad experiment and lowers overall risk, while buying us time before we run out of money or another resource. Third, our Scrum Master requests or amplifies the team's likely already growing interest in running as many small, cheap experiments as possible, and rapidly rolling back experiments too, as the overall bottleneck is constantly remeasured. This is the heart of most design practices. The goal is to iterate rapidly and cheaply. Rapid and cheap iterations lead toward and maintain an optimum opening of the bottleneck towards value in more complex work. Comparing this to a single analysis or a single planning and analysis phase, which end or exit to a discrete build phase, we see the latter, the waterfall model, is structurally not capable of producing the same result in complex work. So if you have a system, your software team is slow, for example, relatively slow. It's not competitive compared to your competitors. There's companies in other areas of the world or across the street that are releasing faster and earning more customers. They're winning market share. So that's your problem. Well, that's clearly at least complex because you have systems at play. You have your humans, you have their humans, you have the humans in the market. So as a Scrum Master, you attempt to assess, first get real-time streaming data of market share. with some automated surveys and analytics of your product use and measuring where your product is frustrating to the users. So wherever there is low frustration analytics, deploy those in mass and give simple red, green, or heat map visualizations in real time. And that's a project all by itself, but that's what you do. That's the first project. Then you work with your team, consultants, other teams to create cards to experiment to change the system. What if we hire the chief engineer from our competitor? Will that violate their non-disclosure agreement? What about that? What if we change the color and add soothing background music to our application? I mean, you can have some really indirect approaches that are good. Well, how quickly can we roll those back? We can turn off music in a deploy 5 seconds later. Okay, that's not difficult. We can use a feature toggle to turn that off in production. How about hiring our competitors' head of engineering? Oh, that is difficult to undo. That will forever darken and sour the relationship further with our competitor, and it will change that person's life and their family's life. That's not quick to roll back. Okay, so that's a higher cost to reverse that experiment. And you create your backlog of experiments, and then you iterate through them in order, reassessing the system, seeing if your real-time analytics are changing the way you want. Whereas if you made a waterfall backlog to improve that system, we will add these features, and we will have these 20 features finished by the next release, and we anticipate that will be done in the next 18 months. You can't inspect and adapt a system that way. You have no way to validate your theory. And this is why markets are all universally moving to faster and faster iteration cycles, and companies with long cycles are reducing market share unless they're protected by governments. Governments do break the open market, or they can. But where you have open market dynamics at play, short sprints win, short innovation cycles win, which is what I'm explaining here. Our fourth case is a chaotic bottleneck. Oh, I think I missed it. No, yeah. Our fourth case is a chaotic bottleneck. The drawing of this landscape is similar to our complex drawing of antenna towers emitting circles of influence. In this case, we also can't see everything. So when it's chaotic, it's also not visible. So you can imagine a thick cloud drifting over our map, and the clouds open and close as it drifts over our map, hiding where some of the antennae or their emitting signals are. So you have an even higher level of complexity. And the antennae themselves are moving, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes staying in one place for a long time, sometimes quickly and sometimes slowly. Sometimes an antenna turns off for a while, only to turn back on again, and maybe in a different location. And what the antennae emit is changing, and as far as we can tell, it's changing at random. This is how you'd visualize a chaotic system if you're looking at it like a map or an aerial view. The strategy here is similar to crisis or disaster response in rapidly emerging and largely unknown scenarios. Action is taken first. So you put a card in the backlog, act, try something. This stimulates the system, and the bottleneck is measured if we can see it. There might be, in this vision, there might be clouds over the bottleneck, but maybe we can see some of the signals exiting the bottleneck. Sometimes we're lucky and we can see the bottleneck at the moment we take action. So we take action to stimulate the system, to cause the system to react. And then we measure if we can see the bottleneck or the second, third, fourth order effects of the bottleneck being stimulated. The goal here is to try to find the bottleneck and almost at random, try actions to see what widens the bottleneck. If you're lucky and you can see the bottleneck, and if you're even more lucky and one of your stimuluses widens the bottleneck, you now have a time window. You now have a chance. It's a chance to attack the bottleneck as fast as you can. The system's chaotic, the bottleneck will move, or the bottleneck, this will cease to be the bottleneck and a new bottleneck will emerge. So it's time dependent. to attack the bottleneck as fast as you can, to exploit it as fast as you can during this window of opportunity, which we have no way to forecast how long it will last. If the bottleneck is exploitable, we exploit as rapidly as possible until the bottleneck narrows again. And then we try another action to stimulate the system. The speed at which actions can be tried and the ability to as rapidly exploit with high volume as responsible determines success or not in a bottleneck that is primarily chaotic. You could think of it like a school of fish in the ocean, and currents of different temperature are changing where the school of fish go, what the fish feed on and where it's moving, maybe a little krill, tiny shrimp drifting in the ocean, and they move with temperatures. An underwater volcano far away can create a warm swell, the krill gets higher, the swarm of fish, the school of fish you're interested in also gets higher, but the prevailing current is changed at the moment, so they're actually coming from the west and not the east. So they're on the east side of the krill, the west side of the krill, not the east, etc. You have a system. What you're trying to do is find the school of fish. Well, you stimulate the system. You drop some krill feed in an area or fish feed in an area, or algae, or you monitor the location of a predator. The system is stimulated, and you look for the fish. Another stimulant is dawn and dusk in fishing. So fine, wait for dawn and dusk and see the system stimulated. Now you see the system. For a moment, you see where the school of fish is. This is a time-dependent opportunity to harvest as much as you can sustainably and ethically to increase the total value of the system as fast as possible. So for example, pregnant spawning fish, you might, as rapidly as possible, put them back in the water. And ship fish that have already spawned, if they're harvestable and if they're the correct size and health, harvest them and process them as quickly as possible, because that school of fish will move. The system is changing. The opportunity is time bound. All systems are like this, and we have no idea how long the opportunity will last. For example, if you own your own business, trends, financial trends, are essentially meaningless. Banks understand this. That's why the loan hurdle to achieve a loan when you own your own business is very different from most banks. If you have a certain amount of profit and loss the last year, every week for the last year in a row, that is almost zero indication that the next week or next quarter, if you're the business owner, will behave that way. Now, this is the value of governments. Governments can interfere with the free market. I actually disagree with that, but they can. They can manipulate the free market to create artificial certainty. Now, when the artificial certainty is too one-sided, that's what creates wars. Trade wars, or worst case, physical wars. So that's why it's actually not net a value add. So instead, behaving in the free market using this method of dealing with chaotic bottlenecks is the superior solution. As challenging as this scenario sounds, our Scrum Masters have a backlog creation strategy that can still get us to a widened bottleneck and achieve value in which we are interested. The backlog is to first create the test, ideally automated, to measure the flow across the bottleneck when it is visible. We can think of this as intelligence gathering. Then we create backlog to immediately start and stop exploitation with as high volume as possible, and when it's responsible. When the bottleneck is sensed to be open widely enough to meet our cost-benefit ratio of exploitation. This again is typically automated, so the team turns on or off the exploitation as rapidly as possible to maximize efficiency. Third, we create backlog of actions to stimulate the system. The strategy of these actions is a topic of our product owner course and the book Product Owner. A brief starter here will be to create actions that we believe to create more healthy options and not reduce the health of the system or increase frustrations among other players in the system. This is called the build a bigger tent ideology and post-growth mindset. Both of these ways of thinking are high utility to product owners. Scrum Masters can and should remind the team and product owner of these decision-making of this decision-making logic in loving, reassuring ways. The authors of this book recommend the Cynefin framework to make sense of the bottleneck that is in front of us. And we agree with Cognitive Edge Consulting that obtaining inputs first and then making sense of those inputs with the Cynefin framework is more likely to give us success than to start with the Cynefin framework, assume a course of action, then gather data. Now we have the leadership framework for decision-making, to use the words of Harvard Business Review. Importantly, a caution. Ordered, obvious bottlenecks have a special risk. A backlog without much research or remeasuring or improvement or Kaizen will create teams exploiting near 100% of the time. But what happens if there is a change, a crisis, causing the bottleneck to be part of a chaotic landscape? The team pattern to exploit only tends to either stop work entirely or double down on their current exploit initiatives, even with getting fewer and fewer or even no returns, and burn through our available cash. This is why the Agile Business Institute recommends no less than 20% of the team's backlog be dedicated to improving the tests of the bottleneck, innovating the exploit, and sensing the landscape. In this way, we have created a complex adaptive system, one of the design goals of Scrum, where each and every team in our system is equipped with a shared goal among all team members. A complex adaptive system is defined, part of the definition is there's a shared common goal across the system, and then there's multiple entities in the system that independently innovate and contribute to moving towards that goal. And that is what Scrum is designed to do. There must be a shared goal for the team. Otherwise, you have a group of individuals that talk to each other at a daily Scrum meeting, and that's not a complex adaptive system. There's a shared goal, and it's the product owner's job to make sure there is one. They can ask anyone to get it, but they make sure there is one. And then there's coordination across the independent entities in the team. That coordination is the Scrum Master's job. And then the team executes towards the goal is innovatively and in as fun and effective way as possible. And that's the developer's goal. And that's the complex adaptive systems of Scrum in very brief. The team regularly practices the skills of pivoting to meet even a change into chaos. This means our team is now anti-fragile. It is able to continue exploiting even in that chaotic system without waiting on decisions outside the team. For more on complex adaptive systems, please see our book, Group Scrum. An organization of complex adaptive systems, and I actually think this has just been renamed Group Agile. An organization of complex adaptive systems allows for the lowest risk organization type, an anti-fragile organization. An anti-fragile organization improves exploit rates and efficiency as complexity grows versus competitors, because the teams do not have to wait for leadership directive or replanning to maximize exploit. Oh, wow, this sentence really needs help. So what am I trying to say here? If you actually have complex adaptive systems, which is our job as a Scrum Master to create at least one team that's a complex adaptive system, it can set its own goal and it can respond to a new goal at any time. Well, if you have an organization made of those with many, so more than 60% Scrum teams, maybe even 100%, now you have an anti-fragile organization that can handle really any rapid change as robustly as any method humans are aware of today, even as the bottleneck changes. Now, if you have a rival, a competitor that doesn't have complex adaptive systems, when there's a supply chain delay, they're shut down for a period of time. And for you, that's an advantage. Right now, as this audiobook is being recorded, that's happening in automotive. There are chip shortages. Actually, there's not chip shortages. There's been a global pricing adjustment, but in any case, it's viewed as a shortage by the automotive manufacturing industry. Companies like Tesla, they switched to field programmable gate arrays, a larger, more expensive chip that through software, it can behave different ways. It can act like a lot of different individual specific chips. they switched in 2 weeks to that and actually increased production because their teams were used to it. They didn't have to wait for the CEO, Elon Musk, to command, we're going to switch to FPGAs. These teams independently, individually said, let's switch to FPGAs. And they started programming their own chips that would then emulate the chip that was missing. Meanwhile, all the other global manufacturers just idled plants. They just shut down production. Oh, we don't have chips. And they have to wait for the board of directors to have an offsite meeting and then do trust falls and go through exploration and visioning sessions and then have an annual meeting to announce there could be a new strategy. And part of it might be researching using FPGAs. But then the research department is told, we probably shouldn't, accounting's just going to axe this project again because these FPGAs are more expensive than chips. And you have this cynicism and you have a rigid culture, which is what we're seeing all over the world in these rigid, non-engaged cultures. So part of this is the culture game to try to make people feel respected and try to make people feel happy. That makes them willing and interested to participate in a complex adaptive system. Then you create the structure of complex adaptive systems. That's Scrum. And now you can dynamically handle any of these problems, whereas most of them, whereas your competitors might not be able to, which is exactly what's happening in automotive right now, among other businesses. I happen to be more deep in automotive and more familiar. Compare this to possible rivals who do not change exploit tactics as the nature of the bottlenecks changes until the next leadership collaboration meeting in 3 weeks or 3 months, and possibly do not change the approved exploit process until the next annual cycle or 5-year plan. Yeah. See more of this in our book, Group Scrum. In summary, Scrum is a complex adaptive system led by a Scrum Master to optimize performance in all cases. The recommended first backlog for each team is to create a value stream map starting from the value we want back to where we are now. This will expose the backlog limiting or preventing us from achieving value. We then test the flow across the bottleneck between what can be easily done now and intended success. Observing the results of this test and when and if the results change will indicate if our bottleneck is governed by an ordered, complex, or chaotic system, and when that system has changed. The percentage of the subsequent backlog to exploit, the backlog and harvest value, versus the percent of the backlog to experiment is determined by the ordered, complex, or chaotic nature of the bottleneck. Basically, all the steps are the same except what percent is research or stimulating the system. And that is determined by whether you have an ordered, complex, or chaotic nature, or complicated. At least 20% of the bottleneck should always be experimenting to see if there is an even better bottleneck to widen and process improvements that can create a more efficient exploit. Exploit is an ethics question, and these authors propose exploiting towards a more advantageous net state as defined by increasing the number of healthy available options and reducing the cost to achieve and maintain those options. So attacking a healthy competitor is in general a poor choice. Amplifying the system that even helps your competitor in general creates even more revenue for you, even selfishly, by creating a healthy system. So yeah, we started this chapter assuming the best practical value had already been identified. And we simply needed to identify and develop and reconfirm which backlog stretches open the bottleneck long enough for the teams to harvest. But of course, the value itself can change. And the mechanism the value changes can be obvious, complicated, complex, or chaotic. How to navigate that is a value choice question the entire team continuously revisits. And that exercise is led by the product owner. To practice those skills, we will enjoy welcoming you to our product owner seminar, and you may level up with our book, Product Owner. Sprint 2. At this point in our seminar, when taught in a 2-day format, We are just returning from lunch. Actually, I'll do that as part of the next chapter. Okay, well, everybody, let's have lunch. That'd be the time if this class were being taught live, if this were a class. I'm really grateful to be able to put in what I was trying to say. Anyone, please help me make the book say what I was trying to say, and please improve it. I don't claim to be the final authority on any of these topics. Your stories may be better than mine. Your experience may be superior at teaching these concepts than mine. And even your concepts may show my concepts aren't the best. Please join me in editing and improving this book so it can continue to be the best and most final word on operating as a Scrum Master to achieve business performance. Please tweet to me at @JoeJustice anytime to help edit the books. Thank you.